The brake pedal hit the floor before Preston's mind could catch up. Red light. Crosswalk. A woman with two small hands gripped in hers, one on each side. He knew that walk, the slight hesitation before stepping off the curb, the way her shoulders stayed squared even when her world was falling apart. Vivian, but it was the children that made his throat close. Twins, maybe 6 years old. The same age gap since she'd walked out of his apartment with nothing but a duffel bag and silence. Beside him, Fiona's voice asking if he was okay sounded like it was coming from underwater. In the back seat, Hazel hummed a song from school, completely unaware her father had just seen two faces that looked exactly like hers, staring back from across the street. Preston's hands tightened on the steering wheel as one thought carved itself into his skull. He'd been a single dad to one child for 7 years. She'd been a single mom to 2, alone. And he never knew. What happens when the life you built starts cracking the moment you realize what you left behind? Preston Cole's name appeared on billionaire lists with the regularity of sunrise. His tech empire had revolutionized cybersecurity, turning him into one of the wealthiest self-made men in the country before 40. The penthouse where he lived with Hazel occupied the entire top floor of the city's most prestigious building. Glass walls offering views that made the world below look conquerable. He'd built everything from nothing. No inheritance, no shortcuts, just code that turned into patents that turned into billions. Forbes had profiled him twice, calling him the billionaire who chose fatherhood over fortune, even though he'd managed to have both. The photos always showed him at charity galas with Hazel in designer dresses, or in boardrooms with her crayon drawings framed on the walls. The narrative was perfect. Devoted single dad who'd refused to let parenthood slow his rise to the top. Tonight had been another data point in that narrative. Dinner at Luminaire, where the waiting list was 6 months, unless your name was Preston Cole. The chef had come out personally to greet Hazel, presenting her with a special dessert that probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in a week. Fiona had worn the diamond earrings he'd given her last month, worth more than a luxury car, and she'd fit into his world with the effortless grace of someone born to wealth. Her family's money predated his by generations. Old Boston money, trust funds, and summer homes, and breeding that couldn't be bought. She could have had anyone, but she'd chosen Preston and his daughter, accepted the package deal without demanding more. The Mercedes Maybach glided through traffic like it owned the streets, because in a city where Preston's company employed thousands and his donations funded wings of hospitals, it practically did. Fiona scrolled through dinner photos on her phone, already planning which ones to share with her social circle. Hazel hummed in the back seat, buckled into a car seat that had been engineered by the same people who designed race car safety equipment. She wore a coat from a boutique children's store where everything was handmade, and nothing had price tags because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. At 7 years old, she attended a private academy that cost more annually than most people earned, took lessons in instruments and languages and equestrian arts. Preston had given her everything, the best schools, the best opportunities, a childhood where no was never about money. Fiona reached over and squeezed his hand, her engagement ring catching the passing street lights. 3 carats, flawless clarity, set in platinum by a jeweler who usually worked with European royalty. Thank you for tonight. Everything was perfect. Her voice carried the cultured accent of boarding schools and debutante balls, the kind of Polish that took generations to cultivate. The wedding was planned for next summer in Tuscany, a destination affair that would cost more than most people's houses. Guest list limited to 300 of the wealthiest and most influential people in the country. Hazel would be flower girl in a dress being custom made by a designer who usually only dressed celebrities. Everything proceeding exactly according to the plan Preston had designed for his life. The traffic light ahead turned yellow, then red. Preston eased the Maybach to a stop at 5th and Market. the downtown intersection where his company's headquarters dominated the skyline. 48 stories of glass and steel with coal technologies in letters visible for miles. Every billion-dollar deal he'd ever closed, every company he'd acquired, every achievement that had lifted him from poverty to unimaginable wealth, all of it concentrated in that building. The crosswalk sign blinked. That's when Preston saw her, and his perfect world began its slow-motion collapse. The woman crossing the street was a ghost from a past he'd thought he'd left behind. She wore a winter coat that was clean, but worn at the cuffs, the kind you kept for years because replacing it wasn't in the budget. Her sneakers were practical, no brand, chosen for comfort over style. She carried plastic grocery bags from Save Mart, the discount chain where people shopped when every dollar mattered. Preston's breath caught because he knew her, despite 7 years and completely different circumstances. Vivian Hart moved through that crosswalk with the same deliberate care she'd had 8 years ago when they dated. Back before Preston's billions had multiplied into the obscene. The slight hesitation before stepping off curbs, the squared shoulders when carrying more than was comfortable, the tilt of her chin that said she refused to show weakness even when struggling. Muscle memory Preston hadn't realized he'd cataloged. They'd met at a tech conference when Preston was already wealthy, but not yet a billionaire, when he was still navigating single fatherhood with 3-year-old Hazel. Vivian had been a software developer, smart and grounded, and for 6 months, she'd been part of his life. Then she'd vanished. One morning, Preston woke to find her gone, just a note. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." He'd searched initially, but he'd been closing a massive acquisition, and Hazel had needed him, and eventually he'd accepted that some people just left. He'd sealed that chapter, kept building his empire, kept being the perfect father, kept moving upward until Vivian became just another person who'd walked away. But the 2 children holding Vivian's hands made forgetting impossible. They were approximately 6 years old, small in the way children are when they're healthy, but not affluent. Their coats were clean, but obviously secondhand, their backpacks mended with patches, their shoes functional rather than fashionable. Everything about them screamed the working-class struggle Preston had grown up in and had sworn his children would never experience. Everything about them also screamed that they were his. The boy had Preston's dark hair and the exact set of his jaw. The girl had eyes so identical to his own that it was like looking in a mirror across genetics and gender. The math assembled itself with the cold precision Preston usually reserved for market analysis. 6-year-old children, Vivian disappearing 7 years ago, 9 months for pregnancy. She'd been pregnant when she left him. She'd known she was carrying his children, twins, and she'd chosen to hide it. Chosen to raise them alone in obvious financial hardship while Preston accumulated billions. Chosen to deny them the resources that could have transformed their lives, the resources Preston would have provided without question. Chosen to let Preston believe he had 1 child when he actually had 3. "Preston, the light's green." Fiona's voice sounded distant, filtered through the rushing in his ears. He couldn't move. His foot stayed frozen on the brake as Vivian and the twins reached the far sidewalk and melted into the evening pedestrian traffic. Behind him, horns began blaring, angry, insistent, demanding he move forward when he felt incapable of any motion at all. "Daddy, the cars are mad at you." Hazel's observation was matter-of-fact, unconcerned, already returning her attention to the song she'd been humming. Preston forced his foot from brake to gas, forced the car through the intersection, forced his expression into something that wouldn't alarm the 2 people who shared his vehicle. "Sorry," he managed, his voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "Thought I saw someone I knew." The lie tasted like ash. Fiona studied his profile with the attention of someone who'd learned to read the subtle tells of powerful men. Someone from before? Before. The word carried weight. Before the billions, Before Fiona, before the life Preston had so carefully constructed. Maybe. I'm not sure. It's been years. Another lie, compounding the first. Hazel had already dismissed the incident, lost in her private 7-year-old world of songs and imagination. But Preston's mind was calculating with an intensity that had made him billions. 6 years old, give or take months. The precise time frame since Vivian had disappeared from his life, twins with his genetic markers, his eyes, his jawline, his coloring mixed with Vivian's features. The probability of coincidence was effectively zero. Those were his children, his son and daughter, growing up in second-hand clothes and shopping at discount stores, while their father lived in a penthouse and collected cars worth millions. Fiona's hand found his on the gear shift, squeezed gently. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you sure you're all right?" Ghost wasn't quite the right word. Ghosts were past, dead, gone. This was present, living, walking around with his DNA. The rest of the drive passed in fractured awareness. Preston dropped Fiona at her brownstone with a kiss that felt mechanical, promised to call tomorrow, waited until she disappeared through her door. Then he drove home on autopilot, his mind spinning through implications, while his body performed the familiar routines. He carried Hazel up to the penthouse, supervised teeth brushing in a bathroom that was bigger than most studio apartments, read 3 chapters of her current book while his mind was elsewhere. After she finally fell asleep in her bedroom that had been designed by a celebrity interior decorator, Preston retreated to his home office and stared at his phone. Finding Vivian took 20 minutes and a private investigator he kept on retainer for corporate intelligence. In the digital age, disappearing completely was nearly impossible, especially for someone who hadn't taken sophisticated precautions. The report arrived within 2 hours, clinical and comprehensive. Vivian Hart, age 34, currently residing at 847 Maple Street. Unit B, rental property in a working-class neighborhood, duplex built in the 1970s, market value approximately $150,000. Employment, senior developer, remote position, startup called Innovate Tech, estimated annual salary $65,000. Children, Theodore, Theo, Hart and Iris, Hart, both age 6, date of birth confirming Preston's calculations exactly. Attending Ridgemont Elementary, public school rated average on standardized metrics. No father listed on birth certificates. No record of child support payments. No evidence of paternity establishment. Just Vivian, alone, raising 2 children on a salary that Preston spent on wine in a typical month. The investigator had included photos from Vivian's sparse social media. The twins at a playground, grinning at the camera. Vivian with them at what looked like a library story time. All 3 at a soccer game, wearing jerseys that had clearly been purchased secondhand. Preston zoomed in on the children's faces until pixels distorted. Theo had his intensity. Even at 6, you could see it in the way he looked at the camera. Focused and analytical. Iris had his eyes and Vivian's thoughtful expression, a combination that made Preston's chest tighten. They were beautiful children. Happy, from what he could see in the photos. Well cared for, despite obvious financial constraints. Vivian had done that. Alone. For 6 years. While Preston had been building his billions and accepting awards for devoted fatherhood to one child. The guilt was irrational. He couldn't be blamed for not knowing about children someone had deliberately hidden from him. But it consumed him anyway, burning through the carefully constructed narrative of his life. Sleep didn't come. Preston spent the night at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city lights, knowing somewhere in that sprawl, Vivian was probably awake too. Maybe working after the kids were asleep. Trying to make ends meet in ways Preston hadn't thought about in years. He'd grown up poor, understood intimately the calculations required when money was scarce, He'd built his empire partially to ensure Hazel would never experience those calculations. And now he'd discovered 2 more of his children were living exactly the life he'd sworn his kids would never know. By dawn, Preston had made a decision. He couldn't unknow what he'd seen. Couldn't pretend those children didn't exist. Couldn't build a future with Fiona while his own son and daughter lived 40 minutes away. In circumstances he could change with a phone call. He needed answers. Needed to understand why Vivian had hidden this. Needed to figure out what responsibility looked like when you discovered children you'd never known existed. The next morning, Preston rearranged his schedule, clearing meetings that represented millions in potential deals. He told Hazel's nanny there was a family emergency, arranged backup care, and drove to Ridgemont Elementary at dismissal time. The school was everything Hazel's private academy wasn't: aging brick instead of modern glass, playground equipment that had seen better decades, parking lot full of practical sedans instead of luxury vehicles. Preston sat in his Maybach across the street and felt like an alien observer of a world he'd deliberately left behind. The dismissal bell rang, and children poured out in waves of noise and backpacks. Preston spotted Theo and Iris immediately. The boy moved with reckless energy, all momentum and confidence. The girl was more careful, pausing to help a smaller child with a dropped folder, before continuing. They were good kids. You could see it in how they interacted with others, in the absence of entitled behavior that marked some children. Then Vivian appeared, and Preston's breath caught. In daylight, the years showed more clearly. Lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a tiredness that went deeper than one bad night. She wore jeans and a sweater that had both seen many washings, practical clothes chosen for durability. But when she spotted the twins, her face transformed with a smile so genuine it hurt to witness. She loved them. That was obvious in every gesture, every automatic adjustment of Iris's backpack, every fond exasperation at Theo's enthusiasm. She'd raised them with care and intention, despite obvious resource constraints. Preston watched them load into an aging Honda, the sedan's paint faded but clean, and felt the weight of everything settling onto his shoulders. What would he have done if Vivian had told him 7 years ago she was pregnant with twins? He'd been managing single fatherhood to 1 child and building his company toward its first billion-dollar valuation. Adding twins to that equation would have been catastrophic. Would he have stepped up? Obviously. That was who he was. Would it have been enough? He honestly didn't know. Would Hazel have suffered from divided attention and resources? Almost certainly. Maybe Vivian had looked at his life and made calculations Preston himself would have struggled with. Maybe she'd seen that he was barely managing and decided not to add to his burden. Or maybe she'd been selfish and stubborn, denying him rights and denying his children resources out of pride. Preston needed to hear it from her, needed the explanation that might make this comprehensible. That evening, after Hazel was asleep, Preston composed an email to the address his investigator had provided. He wrote and deleted a dozen versions before settling on direct. "Vivian, I saw you yesterday at 5th and Market, with your children. I think we need to talk. Preston." He hit send at 11:30 p.m. and spent the next 6 hours alternating between his email and the windows, watching the city that had made him wealthy, while wondering about the children who shared his DNA. The response arrived at 5:42 a.m., characteristically brief. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Coffee." An address followed, halfway between his world and hers. No denial, no explanation, just agreement to meet. Which meant Preston had been right. Which meant everything was about to change in ways he couldn't yet calculate. He spent the next 30 hours in a state of barely controlled chaos, maintaining appearances while his mind spun contingencies. He moved meetings worth millions, delegated decisions that would normally require his personal attention, told Fiona he was dealing with a business crisis that required full focus. She accepted it with the grace of someone accustomed to the demands of billion-dollar empires. The coffee shop was aggressively ordinary. Chain location, corporate decor, menu of overpriced drinks with manufactured artisanal appeal. Preston arrived 15 minutes early in a car worth more than the entire building, ordered black coffee he didn't intend to drink, and chose a corner table where he could see the entrance. Vivian arrived exactly on time because punctuality had always been one of her virtues. She looked different from his memories, and exactly the same. Older, more worn, carrying weight that wasn't physical, but showed in her posture. She wore the same jeans and sweater from yesterday, practical clothes of someone for whom fashion was irrelevant luxury. She didn't order anything, just walked directly to Preston's table and sat with defensive posture and direct eye contact that felt like challenge. "Before you say anything," Vivian started, voice low and controlled, "you need to understand I didn't tell you for a reason." Preston's prepared opening dissolved. "They're mine." Not a question. Vivian's jaw tightened. Biologically, yes. "How long have you known?" "Since the day I left." The confirmation hit like physical impact, despite Preston having already assembled the truth. "You knew you were pregnant with my children, and you just—" "What? Decided I didn't deserve to know?" "I decided you already had a complete family," Vivian said, and her voice carried an edge that sounded like old pain. "You had Hazel. You had Fiona. You had a life that worked. I wasn't going to be the person who destroyed that." Preston's mind stalled on the name. "Fiona? 7 years ago I hadn't even—" "Not 7 years ago. 8 years ago when I left, you were dating her." Vivian's eyes flashed. "Or had you forgotten? The woman from the charity gala, the one with the old money and the connections. You introduced us once. She was perfect for you. Wealthy, cultured, fit into your world in ways I never could. And she loved Hazel. I saw it at that museum event you invited me to. The memory surfaced like something dredged from deep water." 8 years ago, before Vivian had disappeared, there had been a woman. Brief, a few dates, nothing serious. But her name had been Fiona. "That was nothing," Preston said. "We went out maybe 3 times. It ended months before you left." "It didn't look like nothing when I saw you two together," Vivian countered. "It looked like the life you were supposed to have. Wealthy single dad, beautiful socialite, adorable daughter, perfect family in the making. And then I got pregnant, with twins. 2 babies that would complicate everything, that would require you to split your attention, that would change the trajectory you were on. I looked at that perfect picture, and I couldn't be the one to ruin it." "So you made the decision alone," Preston said, anger and something like understanding warring in his chest. "You decided what I wanted, what Hazel needed, what was best for everyone without asking me." "Yes," Vivian said flatly. "I made the choice I could live with. I went back to Portland, moved in with my parents, had the twins there. My family helped. I worked remote. I made it work. For 6 years." Preston's voice was harsh. "You made it work for 6 years while I, what? Lived in luxury? Built my billions? Had no idea I had 2 more children growing up without resources I could have provided?" "Yes," Vivian repeated, "because those resources came with strings. They came with you in their lives. They came with custody battles, and lawyers, and court dates, and having to explain why their father didn't want them initially." "I would have wanted them!" Preston's volume rose before he caught it. "I would have stepped up. I would have been there." "You were already drowning," Vivian said, and now her voice cracked. "You told me so yourself multiple times, how overwhelmed you were with Hazel and the company, how you barely slept, how you were terrified of failing her. And you wanted me to add twins to that equation? To watch you destroy yourself trying to be everywhere for everyone?" The logic was twisted, but not entirely wrong, and that made it worse. Preston had been overwhelmed 8 years ago before the billions had given him resources to hire help. You could have told me anyway. Let me make the choice. And watch you choose Fiona? Vivian's eyes were bright now. Watch you build the perfect family with her, while my children were the inconvenient complication you tried to fit in on weekends. Watch them grow up knowing their father had picked someone else's perfect life over theirs. I couldn't do that to them. So I took the choice away from everyone and carried the consequences alone. Silence fell between them, heavy with 7 years of unhad conversations. Preston's mind was reeling because her version of events, however flawed, came from a logic he could almost follow. If she'd truly believed he was building a life with Fiona, if she'd thought telling him about the pregnancy would destroy something precious, if she'd been trying to protect not just herself, but him and Hazel and even the children she was carrying, it was wrong, but it wasn't incomprehensible. Do they know about me? Preston asked finally. Vivian nodded slowly. They know they have a father named Preston Cole. They know he didn't know about them. They've asked questions. I've answered honestly without making you the villain. How generous, Preston said, sarcasm reflexive. I'm not trying to be generous. I'm trying to protect them. Vivian leaned forward. They're good kids, Preston. Happy kids despite everything. They have friends and school and stability. I know you're angry. You have every right. But before you decide what happens next, think about them. Not about what you lost. Not about what you're owed. About what's actually best for Theo and Iris. Hearing their names made them real beyond photos and investigator reports. Real children with lives and routines, and no idea their world might be about to explode. I want to meet them, Preston said. I want to know my children. Vivian closed her eyes. When she opened them, they held something like grief. Preston, I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you. You made your choice 7 years ago. I'm making mine now. And what about Hazel? The question landed like a trap. What about her? You tell her she has siblings. Explain that you had another relationship that produced children. Divide your time between 3 kids instead of focusing everything on her. Introduce chaos into her perfect life because you can't accept that some stories don't have neat endings. Each question was precision targeted at Preston's vulnerabilities. She has a right to know her brother and sister. Maybe. Or maybe you're about to destroy multiple lives because of guilt and pride. Vivian stood abruptly. I'm not stopping you if you decide to pursue this, but be sure. Not impulsive, not guilty, not angry. Sure. Because they deserve better than a father who shows up out of obligation and disappears when it gets hard. I wouldn't you? Vivian's gaze was unflinching. You have a perfect life, Preston. Billions of dollars. Beautiful fiancé. One child who fits neatly into your world. Adding 2 more kids you didn't plan for. A co-parenting relationship with me. The mess and complication of a blended family that threatens everything. So ask yourself what you're willing to sacrifice, because if you walk into their lives, you don't get to walk back out. She left before Preston could respond. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully, absurdly at odds with the wreckage of the conversation. Preston sat alone, Vivian's challenge echoing in the space she'd vacated. She was right that this was complicated. Right that his current life would have to change dramatically. Right that there were no easy answers. But she was also wrong to think complexity meant walking away was acceptable. Preston thought about Hazel, about the perfect world he'd built for her, thought about Fiona and the wedding planned for Tuscany, thought about his company and the demands that barely left room for one child. Thought about Theo and Iris, who'd been doing fine without him, who might be better off never knowing their billionaire father existed. But he also thought about the man he wanted to be versus the man he'd accidentally become, about responsibility and truth and the difference between difficult and impossible. That night, after Hazel was asleep, Preston called Fiona to his penthouse. She arrived concerned, settling beside him on furniture worth more than cars. "What's wrong? You've been distant for days." Preston told her everything. The crosswalk, Vivian, the twins, the 7 years of secrecy, the impossible situation expanding before him. Fiona listened without interrupting, her expression carefully neutral in the way of people trained from birth to control visible reactions. "What do you want to do?" she asked when he finished. "I don't know." Preston's hands were shaking. "I want to do the right thing. I just don't know what that is." "Do you want to be in their lives? Actually parent them?" Fiona's voice was gentle but direct. "They're my children." "That's not what I asked." She took his hand. "Biology is one thing. Active fatherhood is another. You can acknowledge they exist without disrupting everything we've built. You can provide financial support without emotional involvement. Preston, I need to know what you actually want." The question forced clarity. Preston thought about Hazel's birth, about the terror of new fatherhood, about the nights he'd thought he couldn't manage. "When Hazel was born, I was terrified," he said slowly. "Her mother was gone. I had no idea what I was doing, and I had this tiny human who needed me completely. There were nights I wanted to break, but walking away wasn't an option. She needed me, and that made everything else simple. Not easy, but simple." He met Fiona's eyes. "Theo and Iris don't need me. They have Vivian. They're fine. But they're still mine. And I think that means walking away isn't an option this time either." Fiona's expression shifted, something closing behind her eyes. "What about us? What about the life we've planned?" "I don't know," Preston admitted. "I don't have those answers. But I know I can't marry you while pretending they don't exist. That's not fair to you, or to them, or to Hazel." Silence stretched between them, expensive and heavy. Finally, Fiona stood with the grace of someone who'd been taught from childhood how to exit uncomfortable situations. "I need time to think about this," she said. Her voice controlled. "This isn't what I signed up for, Preston. I agreed to be stepmother to 1 child, not 3. I agreed to blend my life with yours, not with a complicated co-parenting situation with an ex-girlfriend. I understand." Preston stood, too. "I'm sorry. This isn't what either of us planned." "No, it's not." Fiona's expression was sad but firm. "I love you. I love Hazel. But I also know my limits. I need to figure out if this is something I can accept." She kissed his cheek, collected her coat, and left. Preston stood in his penthouse that suddenly felt emptier than it ever had, and watched his planned future walk out the door. Everything he'd thought he wanted, the perfect wedding, the perfect blended family, the perfect life, crumbling because of 2 children he'd seen once across a street. The next morning, Preston emailed Vivian again. "You're right that I need to be sure, but I'm sure about one thing. They deserve to know I exist, and I deserve a chance to know them. I'm not asking to disrupt their lives. I'm asking for the opportunity to be part of them, however that looks, whatever it takes. I'm ready." 3 days passed before Vivian responded. 3 days of Preston existing in limbo, continuing his routines, while internally preparing for everything to change. When her response finally came, it was brief. "Saturday, 10 a.m., Riverside Park. Bring Hazel. They should all meet together." Preston read the message repeatedly, trying to decode implications. Bring Hazel. Of course, this wasn't just about him meeting the twins. This was about 3 children learning they were siblings, about a family assembling from deliberately separated pieces. Saturday morning arrived with crisp, autumn weather that felt portentous. Preston dressed Hazel carefully, trying to formulate an explanation that was honest without being overwhelming. "We're meeting some people today," he started as they drove in the Maybach. "Who?" Hazel was reading in the back seat, only partially attentive. A friend of mine from a long time ago, and her kids. How old are they? Hazel looked up, interested. About your age. Can I play with them? Maybe. We'll see how it goes. Preston knew he was being cowardly, not telling her the full truth. But how did you explain siblings to a 7-year-old who'd been an only child her entire life? How did you prepare her for learning her father had hidden children? Riverside Park was busy with weekend families. Preston spotted Vivian on a bench, Theo and Iris on either side like small guards. They looked nervous, clearly briefed on something significant happening. Hazel saw the children and perked up immediately. Is that them? Yeah, Preston managed. That's them. He took Hazel's hand and walked toward Destiny, feeling like he was stepping off a cliff. Vivian saw them approaching and stood. She said something to the twins, who looked over with the open curiosity of children meeting strangers. They didn't know. That was obvious in their unsuspecting faces. To them, Preston was just another adult. Hazel, this is Vivian, Preston managed. And these are her children, Theo and Iris. Hi, Hazel said shyly. The twins mumbled greetings, already looking back toward playground equipment. You can go play, Vivian told them. If you want. Hazel looked at Preston for permission. He nodded, not trusting his voice. She ran toward the swings, and after a moment, the twins followed. Just like that, his 3 children were in the same space, breathing the same air, occupying the same reality. Preston sat on the bench beside Vivian, both watching the playground. She doesn't know, Vivian observed. I didn't know how to tell her. Neither do I. Vivian sounded lost. I've spent 6 years avoiding this conversation. On the playground, Hazel was showing Iris how to swing higher, while Theo attempted increasingly bold moves on the monkey bars. They looked like normal kids doing normal things, except nothing about this was normal. They look happy, Preston said quietly. They are. Most of the time. Vivian's voice softened. Theo thinks he's a superhero. Iris reorganizes her room when she's anxious. They fight constantly and defend each other fiercely. They're not perfect, but they're good. You did that, Preston acknowledged. Raised them well despite everything. I did my best. Sometimes it felt nowhere near enough. They sat in silence, 2 people who'd once mattered to each other watching children they'd created navigate playground equipment. What happens now? Preston asked. Vivian turned to look at him fully. Honestly? I have no idea. I thought I had it figured out. Keep everyone separate, maintain control. But watching them together, she paused. Hazel has your eyes too. I didn't realize before. But all 3 of them, they look like siblings. They are siblings. Preston's voice was rough. They have a right to know each other. Do they? Vivian's challenge was soft. Or are we about to hurt them because we're too guilty and proud to leave things alone? I'm not trying to take them from you. I don't want custody battles, or to be their primary parent. I just want to be their father, however that looks. It's going to be messy, Vivian said. Co-parenting is hard in the best circumstances. Doing it with billions of dollars and power imbalances, and years of secrecy, I know. Preston did know. But they deserve both of us. Present, not fighting, just there. The next hour passed in surreal suspension, Preston and Vivian making awkward conversation, while 3 children invented games and alliances. Other park visitors probably thought them a divorced couple doing weekend custody handoff, close enough to truth that Preston didn't correct the assumption. As the park grew more crowded, Vivian checked her watch. We should go. Promised them lunch. Wait. Preston stood. Can I see them again? Can we start figuring out what this looks like? Vivian studied him for a long moment. You're sure? Because once we tell them the truth, there's no undoing it. They'll have expectations. You'll have responsibilities. I'm sure. Vivian nodded slowly. Okay, Next Saturday. Same place. But Preston, we tell them the truth. Together. All three of them. Before this goes further. Agreed. Vivian called the twins over. They came reluctantly, not ready to leave. You look like us, Iris announced to Preston with childish directness. Theo, doesn't he? The observation landed like a grenade. Preston saw Vivian tense. Maybe a little, Theo agreed, studying Preston's face. Do we know you? Not yet, Preston managed. But maybe soon. Hazel tugged his sleeve. Daddy, can they come over? Iris likes the same books as me. The word daddy hung in the air. Preston watched realization begin to form in the twins' faces. Not full understanding, but the beginning of connection. Vivian was already ushering them toward her aging Honda. She glanced back once, caught Preston's eye, nodded. Promise and warning combined. On the drive home, Hazel chattered about her new friends, while Preston's mind spun with logistics and implications. That evening, Fiona called. Can we talk? They met at her brownstone over tea that tasted like farewell. I've been thinking, Fiona started, about everything you told me, about the twins and doing the right thing. And? Preston braced himself. I think you're right. You can't walk away from them. She paused. But I also can't do this. I signed up for one child, Preston. One set of complications. Adding 2 more kids. An ex permanently in your life. The chaos of blended family with massive wealth differentials. That's not the life I want. I understand. Let me finish. Fiona's voice was kind but unyielding. I love you. I love Hazel. But I also know myself well enough to recognize my limits. This isn't selfishness. This is honesty about what I can handle. They talked for another hour, making the breakup as graceful as possible, acknowledging what they'd meant while accepting that meaning didn't equal forever. When Preston left, he felt sad, but also strangely relieved. 1 week until the truth. Preston spent it in intense preparation, researching child psychology, consulting family therapists, talking to attorneys about custody and parental rights, running financial projections for supporting the twins. Everything except figuring out the actual words to say. Saturday arrived too fast. Preston drove to the park with Hazel, his heart hammering. Vivian was already there with nervous twins. Hazel ran toward them cheerfully. Hi, want to play? Theo looked at his mother. In a minute, Vivian said. First, we need to talk, all of us. She gestured for everyone to sit. Preston sat beside Hazel, completing a semicircle of children flanked by adults. Okay, Vivian started, voice steady despite visible trembling. I need to tell you something important. 3 pairs of identical brown eyes watched her. Theo, Iris, you know how you've asked about your father? Both twins nodded, hands finding each other automatically. Your father didn't know about you. When I was pregnant, I chose not to tell him. That was my decision, not his. He didn't abandon you. He didn't know you existed. Vivian's voice cracked. And he's here now. He wants to know you. Crushing silence. Preston watched understanding dawn across Iris's face first. Theo looked confused, then defensive. Here, Iris whispered. Preston, Vivian confirmed. Preston is your father. Hazel's head whipped toward Preston. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart. Preston's voice was thick. It's complicated. I didn't know. But Theo and Iris are my children too. They're your brother and sister. The words reshaped reality. Hazel's face cycled through emotions. Confusion, hurt, wonder. But you're my daddy, she said small, and the unspoken question was clear. Am I not enough? Always, Preston said fiercely, pulling her close. That never changes. You're my daughter, and I love you more than anything. But I'm also their father. Now that I know, I can't pretend I don't. Theo stood abruptly. I don't want a father. We're fine. Theo, Vivian reached for him. We are. His voice was scared and defensive. We don't need him. We have you. You are good, Preston agreed. Your mom is amazing. But that doesn't mean there's no room for me too. I'm not replacing anything. I just want to be part of your lives. Why should we trust you? Theo challenged. You didn't want us before. I didn't know before, Preston repeated gently. If I had known, I would have been there from the beginning. I would have been at the hospital when you were born. I would have been there for every moment. But I didn't get that chance. I'm asking for one now. Iris looked at Vivian. Why didn't you tell him? The question carried more weight than its simple words. I thought I was protecting everyone, Vivian said. I thought it would be easier. I was wrong. Sometimes adults make mistakes even when trying to do right. I'm sorry. The apology hung insufficient but sincere. What happens now? Hazel asked, always practical. Now we figure it out, Preston said. Together. It might be weird. It might be hard. But we'll work through it. Do we call you Dad? Theo asked, combative and curious. Whatever feels right, Preston said. Preston is fine. Dad is fine. We'll figure out what works. Theo didn't agree or disagree, just sat back down, which Preston counted as victory. The conversation shifted to logistics, schedules, phone calls, therapy, gradual integration. Vivian and Preston talked while children absorbed the magnitude of change. When Vivian suggested the kids play, all three hesitated, before drifting toward playground equipment. Not together, but not separate. Finding new orbits. That was brutal, Vivian said when alone. But necessary, Preston agreed, watching his three children test new reality. I'm sorry, Vivian said, for everything, for leaving, hiding them, making choices alone. I convinced myself I was being noble, but I was really just scared. Preston wanted anger, but looking at this woman who'd raised his children alone, he felt mostly tired. We both made mistakes, but we're here now. We can only try better going forward. Co-parenting will be complicated, Vivian said, especially with... She gestured at Preston's expensive watch, the markers of his wealth. Your resources will change their lives. Our resources, Preston corrected. They're my children now. Everything I have is available to them. Not to buy them or replace you, but as their father providing what I can. Vivian's eyes were bright. That's what I was afraid of, that you'd show up with billions, and suddenly nothing I'd done would be enough. You raised them alone with limited resources, Preston said firmly. That's not small. That's extraordinary. Money makes things easier, but it doesn't make love or dedication. You did that. I'm just hoping there's room for me too. They watched their children slowly orbit closer. Iris showing Hazel something on the monkey bars, Theo maintaining distance, but watching. She's good with them, Vivian observed. She's good with everyone, Preston said, feeling pride and fear mixed. The following months were exactly as messy as predicted. Tears, arguments, setbacks. Theo refused to call Preston anything but his name, maintaining emotional walls. Iris was anxious, needing constant reassurance. Hazel struggled with sharing attention, acting out in small ways that broke Preston's heart. They established routines, every other weekend, all three kids together. Park visits, museums, time at Preston's penthouse that made the wealth disparity impossible to ignore. Vivian dropped off twins with tense politeness, a relationship rebuilding molecule by molecule. Preston rearranged his billionaire life around custody time, hired family therapists for everyone, learned to braid Iris's hair and decode Theo's superhero references. Navigated the impossible balance of being present for three children with different needs and relationships to him. Fiona sent a text 6 weeks later. I hope you're happy. I mean it. You're doing the right thing." Preston didn't respond. Nothing to say except thanks, inadequate for a woman who'd stepped aside. 3 months in, something shifted. At the park, Theo fell from monkey bars. Nothing serious, scraped knee and pride. Before Vivian could reach him, Preston was there, cleaning the wound with automatic competence. "You're okay, buddy, just a scratch. You're tough." And Theo, sniffling, looked at Preston and whispered, "Thanks, Dad." Barely audible, maybe unconscious. But Preston heard it. Vivian heard it. Something in the air shifted. Progress. Slow, painful, earned. But progress. 6 months after the crosswalk, Preston looked at a family photo his assistant had framed. Not professional, just candid from the park. All 5 of them grinning with varying authenticity. Vivian on one end, Preston on the other. 3 children between them learning they could belong to both. Not the family Preston had imagined. Not neat or controlled or simple. Messier, harder, full of complications with no easy solutions, but real. And his. Preston's phone buzzed with a text from Iris. "Can we get pizza Saturday? Theo wants pepperoni, but I want Hawaiian, and we need you to vote." Preston smiled, typed, "Half and half?" Immediate response, "Genius. This is why we keep you around." A small moment, insignificant in cosmic terms. But to Preston, it felt like everything. Proof that families weren't perfect structures built once. They were living things that grew and adapted and sometimes fell apart and reformed in new configurations. He thought about the crosswalk sometimes, about timing. 10 seconds different, and he might never have seen them. His life would have continued on its planned trajectory, ignorant and incomplete. But he had seen them, and he'd chosen not to look away. A year after the crosswalk, Preston stood at another intersection with all 3 kids in the Maybach. Hazel reading, Theo and Iris arguing about soccer, normal kid noise, normal family chaos. The light turned green, and Preston drove forward, past and present and future converging in motion. He didn't have all answers, didn't know if he was doing any of this right, but he was present, trying. Learning that sometimes the families requiring the most work to build are the ones worth fighting for. In the rearview mirror, Preston caught Hazel's eyes. She smiled, gap-toothed, mouthed, "I love you." Preston smiled back, glanced at the twins, Iris watching out the window, Theo gesturing about soccer, his children, all 3. Not perfect, not planned, but his. And that was enough. More than enough. Everything.